Hello everyone, this is Rick and welcome to Astral Club. Today's video is Underwater City in the year 2500. Should be a fun one. Before we get into it, I just want to remind people of your typical future time travel rules when you're astral traveling. You communicate telepathically. You can stay longer in the future, sometimes hours and days, and even longer, while only minutes transpire here in the present. And many times you can be seen and touched and perceived by those future residents. So I just want to remind everybody of that before we get into it. I also want to remind people that we have two playlists now. One is the question playlist, and one has all of the videos on that playlist. So let's get into it. It happened last Sunday. I fell asleep sometime around 11, and as happens quite often, when I want to astral project, that's when I'll do it. And I probably left my body about 10 or 15 minutes after falling asleep. I found myself in my native town in Pennsylvania, which there's an automatic homing beacon that sometimes takes me there. So I decided to go to the year 2500 to see what was going on there. So I put forth the clear command to go to the year 2500 and to go up the line, and I lost consciousness, which often happens in far time travel trips. When I came to, it was very disturbing. Imagine falling asleep, just a normal sleep for yourself. You lose consciousness, and the next thing you know, you're deep underwater when you come back to consciousness again. That's what happened to me. Normally, I'll fly quite high up before I time travel because it saves me these types of disturbing things. Now, so I regained my consciousness very deep underwater. Other than psychically traumatized a bit, obviously my astral body doesn't need oxygen, and it also can't get the bends. So I just shot up towards the faint light that I saw at the surface. And I came to the surface in an instant and decided to fly up into the sky. There I looked about, seeing not much other than just a large ocean. Then suddenly I saw off in the horizon some glowing Chinese/Japanese characters in the sky. So I figured, well, let's head towards that. And that's what I did. And I found that there was a very large platform on the surface of this ocean with hundreds of people lined up who were going 4 at a time or so into a bullet-shaped capsule that was closing up, and then they were descending beneath. And this was happening 4 at a time. I decided that I was definitely going to explore this and see where they were going. So I dove down into the ocean, and I saw what was amazing, a very large central geodesic dome, all covered in shiny metal, with 6 supplementary domes fed around it in a spoke type of formation. I knew I wanted to explore here, but before I got too deep into this experience, I thought it was valuable to take a look at the whole Earth. I remember my last time travel, I got so interested in the local events that I didn't have any context. So I decided, and it was tough to leave that area, but I decided to shoot up into the sky and do a once around the Earth to see exactly what's going on, where we are here in this 2,500 year time frame. So I did so, and as I was rotating around the Earth, the first continents I came upon rather, was the North American and the South American continents. I could see that they had changed quite a bit. For instance, I couldn't see Florida any longer, and the Gulf had lengthened dramatically, taking over many of the cities that we would recognize today. San Diego was gone, Portland, Seattle, Charleston, Houston, New Orleans, and when I saw the East Coast, after seeing what happened to Florida, I noticed that many of the major eastern cities and that coastline, that entire coastline, seemed to be missing. I pulled back a little bit more and I noticed that there was no ice at the poles any longer, or else just a very small amount sprinkled. The Greenland ice sheet was gone, and the North Pole had a little bit of ice at it, I guess, but not much. And Antarctica, I couldn't see much ice at all there. So what must have happened is the ice sheets melted, raising the water levels on Earth quite dramatically. I decided I was going to see what else had gone on in the country. In South America, there was a huge chunk of the Amazon rainforest, which was now a giant inland sea. I also saw the Buenos Aires, Argentina, and Montevideo, Uruguay. That whole area was underwater up to around the Paraguay area, and I was able to confirm this by looking at a map after I got back. I'd like to pretend that I knew all that geography right in my head, but I'm a little rough on that in the South America area. Then I decided, let's check out Europe. Africa didn't appear too different to me. I didn't notice any major differences. I'm sure there were some coastal problems, but I didn't really notice anything from my orbit. I noticed that the UK and Ireland had lost quite a bit of coastline. I saw that East Anglia in the UK particularly had disappeared below the waves. I saw that Denmark and northern Germany were underwater. And let's see, what else? Okay, the cities of Copenhagen, Stockholm, and St. Petersburg were gone as well. As far as Russia is concerned, their whole northern polar area had lost hundreds of miles of territory that went underwater. All of this was quite dramatic to me. It was affected me quite a bit, but I decided to complete my quick survey. I went to Australia next, and I noticed there was a huge central lake now, if you will, in southern Australia. That seemed to be the biggest effect right there. And after I was done looking at Australia, I couldn't help but see that there was an enormous typhoon taking up a large section of the Pacific Ocean, probably larger than I've ever seen on any news story that characterized typhoons in the past. So what we had here was one enormous storm. And I thought to myself, well, with all of the caps melted, ocean levels rising, I imagine the heat rising as well, that would provide the fuel needed for this type of storm. Oh, and one more thing I wanted to point out before I get into the Asian and underwater city. One thing I forgot to point out was that in North America, in the United States, there was an enormous section of the middle part of the country that was just desert. You could see it from far up. It was just desert. And that kind of reminded me of a projection I had quite a while back where I was in the Charlotte area. And in that future, it was desert there, which surprised me at that point, and I didn't have any explanation for it. But the whole breadbasket of the United States is now, in that future, one large desert. So I can only imagine how awful that must have been. Okay, so here I am. I'm looking down in the Pacific, and there's this typhoon that is taking up an enormous section of the Pacific Ocean and is spiraling its way towards Japan and China. As I came down closer, I saw that a huge section of the coastal areas of Japan had disappeared. Tokyo, at least half of it seemed to be underwater. There was some part of the city that was still standing, but I saw coastlands that had gone underwater. And China certainly had lost a good portion of its territory. Shanghai, Beijing, Hong Kong looked to be underwater as well. So, that was my brief overview of what was happening in the world. So now I decided to spiral back to where I was before. And I was zeroing in on that ident of those Chinese characters that I saw glowing in the sky. That was above this gigantic sea geodesic dome with its supplementary domes surrounding it. So I aimed for that, found it, and then dove under the ocean to decide, what I can find here. So I went ahead and sped down like a bullet until I reached the outside of the main dome. Now, I'm not sure exactly how deep we were, but the sunlight was definitely, you could still be seen, but it was very dim. Very dim. So I could tell we were fairly deep underneath the water. The geodesic dome the main one was enormous. And as I said, the outside of it was metallic. I would guess a real rough estimate might be something like 2,500 feet in diameter, which would be somewhere around 760 meters in diameter. Next, I wanted to get inside, so I raised my vibrations and melded through the main geodesic dome. Once I was inside, I hovered towards the top, and it was quite high inside that dome. I could see the people running about beneath me, but I was pretty far up, and I was trying to keep a low profile. I didn't really want anyone to see me because I wasn't really in the mood of having to explain who I was and what I was doing. And what I could see as I turned around was now suddenly it looked like it was transparent. So for instance, when I was inside the geodesic dome, I could look out and see the ocean. Whereas before, when I was outside, I couldn't see inside. So I'm not sure what type of technology was behind that. But once inside, I could see this bustling little community beneath me. There were shops, there were people walking about. Some of them seemed to be about business. Others were just strolling about, enjoying themselves. There were shops, and it was like a small community that you might be able to see anywhere. The people were dressed very comfortably in a wide variety of fabrics. They seemed to be very loose fitting for the most part, but they were colorful. I looked around and there was plants everywhere. There were growing plants inside, all along the living areas. So it was a very, very green area. There were moving sidewalks, much like you see in airports that were transporting some people about. And there was also some small vehicles that were being propelled, I'm sure through some sort of electricity or what have you, because there certainly wasn't any exhaust that I could see. And it was quite amazing to see all this activity happening. And there were certainly, I was looking at many hundreds of people just walking around down there. and I saw whole other areas which were probably living quarters. I decided I wanted to take a look at the other 6 adjoining spheres as well. Now, they were a fraction of the size. I would say that each one was maybe a quarter of the diameter or so of the main geodesic dome. So I went through the dome once again, and once I was outside, it was metal again. I couldn't see on the inside. The 6 domes, I went in each one after another. And making a generalization, I would say that one had factories and offices, so it was probably used for work. Another one had a wide variety of recreation. There were tennis courts and handball courts, and there was running and various exercises, various weight type of gyms, everything that you could think of to keep the people healthy. Another one was devoted to crop production, so it was filled to the brim with layer after layer of a variety of green plants. I also saw seaweed-looking crops as well. Another one looked like it was for drilling and mining because it was connected to a number of drills that were drilling into the seabed. And there was a covered assembly line that was feeding rocks and what have you into that processing, mining, drilling sphere for, I guess, some sort of processing to be turned into usable metals and other materials. There was one that looked to me like a huge water purification because there was an enormous number of pipes that were coming from the ocean, and then there was a central one which was being fed into the main geodesic dome. So I assume it was probably purifying the seawater, taking the salt out, and then feeding it into the main geodesic dome. And then there was a 6th one, which I believe was power generation because I could sense the vibrations coming from it. However, I have no idea how it worked. I don't know what technology they were using. There was no apparent moving parts that I could notice. So your guess is as good as mine. I then ascended back towards the surface of the ocean, and I noticed that the track that was being used to go down to the central geodesic dome was looking a lot like a corkscrew. It had these bullet type vehicles that were spiraling down one after another, feeding itself into the main geodesic dome. As I got to the surface, I saw that most of the people that I had seen there earlier were now gone. There was only a few left that seemed to be observing something. And I could see myself that there was an oncoming storm. It was obviously that huge typhoon that I had seen. So my guess was those people at the surface had been doing whatever it is they were doing, whether it was play or whether it was some sort of scientific observation. I'm not sure. But they obviously decided that it was time to get back to the geodesic dome under the water for this typhoon to show up. Shortly after this, as the typhoon was bearing down on my position, I was taken back to my body. I started thinking about what I had observed. The ice caps had melted, sea levels had risen dramatically, the planet had obviously gotten warmer. The central part of the United States was desert. So many coastal cities had been flooded. And as I did my quick pass over the United States from some thousands of feet up, I can only imagine the storms because I saw a lot of damage, a lot of wreckage that had been lying about that coastal area, remains of the cities. But imagine how destructive storms might be along coasts, whether it's in Asia or whether it's in the Americas. it's heat that causes these huge storms. If our planet had, say, heated up another 10 degrees or so, and the polar ice caps had melted, imagine the strength and the fury of these storms and how more numerous they might be. So even coastal cities that perhaps might have survived flooding, perhaps they took up stakes, the people did, and went elsewhere, because imagine storms infinitely worse than they currently are, and then more numerous. That just would not be a sustainable process. It's getting bad enough nowadays with these hurricanes that seem to be stronger. Imagine if they were much more numerous and even more powerful. It just wouldn't be a smart idea to continue to rebuild cities after they were destroyed. It was a relatively quick experience. I didn't really have time to do any more major studies, because before I got really deep into the underwater city, I wanted to do an overview of the world, so we had some sort of a basic idea of what was happening in 2500. Keep in mind that this is a possible future. It is not something that we cannot avoid. We certainly can avoid this future if we start making changes now. But this is what I saw in the year 2500. So if you have any questions or comments, certainly hit me with those and I'll do the best I can. Keep in mind, I don't have a lot more details because this was more of an overview episode than it was drilling down to a very deep interpersonal one. It's tough when you only have limited time. You have a whole world that needs to be explored. So ask any questions or comments you might have. Otherwise, please if you like this episode, and share it with those of like minds. Subscribe if you haven't done so already. If you have, hit the bell button. And I will see you on the astral plane.